This is Horkheimer's review of Oswald Spengler's The Hour of Decision. It's a really good writing that addresses something, which is that there actually is quite a bit of parallels, I feel like, between Adorno and Horkheimer's analysis and some of Spengler. There is some parallels there, but they also obviously have quite a bit of disagreements. And this is a really good writing because it basically captures the core disagreements they have with what he's saying. And you'll notice the second one that will follow this, the Bergson essay or review, that will actually kind of juxtapose Spengler versus Bergson and how they're both kind of saying things that are accurate. And it's a very powerful kind of polemic because it shows them navigating the thread between all these different viewpoints about the appearance of social phenomena and why these are insufficient. To summarize it at the start, Spengler mistakes the appearance of history for its essence and ends up viewing historically produced social relations, such as war, hierarchy, domination, property, conquest, suffering, etc., as eternal facets of human nature, which he proceeds to actually celebrate, which he calls pessimism. He views human history as violent, and therefore violence is natural, and therefore it's good. From this position, he's able to conclude that attempts to overcome this trend in human history is a sign of weakness. This is ideology masked as realism, and a mockery of any respect for the human being and his possibilities. Pessimism works exactly this way. Inequality exists, therefore equality is impossible. War exists, therefore peace is impossible, and ideology exists, therefore truth is impossible, and so on. But describing something as historically real doesn't prove it's historically necessary. That's literally what the is-ought gap is. This is all emblematic of how he confuses appearance and essence. He discusses how nations compete, classes fight, states pursue power, etc., and concludes that the desire for domination is the ultimate cause of it all. He doesn't stop and ask what social relations produce such competition or conflict in the first place. Spengler remains enraptured by big numbers, the length that empires last, how much area was in a civilization, how much people are in an army, all of that. He spends way too much time on that. Sees demographics and cycles and trends and feels a sense of profundity in such things simply because the scale is large. But the magnitude doesn't have nothing to help investigation. Spengler is correct that the fate of history does not depend on the intellectual, that no future deed can ever undo blood and misery of the past, or that senseless struggle does in fact characterize the history of humanity. But this does not make suffering a value in itself to be celebrated as a sort of prime mover of history. Spengler's hatred of the worker and his misanthropy is given such violent expression, it is as if he wishes to escape the accusation of having these qualities by making them his explicit ideals. The powerless identify with power and transform their submission into admiration, and so instead of criticizing domination, they can end up glorifying it. This is why there are many people who seem to celebrate strength and domination for their own sake. They say things like, might makes right, but then when they're done saying might makes right, they complain about how the world doesn't operate on the lens they want, because it's, they don't have the might, I guess. I don't know. It's totally, anyone saying might makes right is stupid, unless they're like a nihilist, because it's a nihilistic phrase. If you believe might makes right, you can't complain about anything, because it's just, you lack the might. Anyways, as though identifying with the victor allows them to escape their own vulnerability. This is literally Nietzsche's concept of resentment, by the way. This is literally what the resentment is, for if you want that explained as simply as possible. But we can't just reduce Spengler to ideology. He is still accurately mapping out the appearance of history in a novel way. There is an often ignored connection between culture and power, the importance of large historical structures, and the decline of civilizations. The issue is not at all that Spengler is too pessimistic, but his reconciliation and lionization of domination. Alright, now let's move on to the text, which is Horkheimer's review of Spengler's The Hour of Decision. The Faustian culture of Europe, says Spengler, is threatened by two terrible revolutions. The revolution of the white world in the struggle between the classes, and the revolution of the colored world in the struggle between the races. Spengler interprets the class struggle as the mob revolt of all the best and most basic and most common instincts against the strong and noble race of the propertied. As for Spengler, property is a matter of race, a gift of which vanishingly few are capable, the result of long breeding conducted by exalted dynasties. The economic social forms and theories of class struggle are only a mask, as it was not the economic misery capitalism brought to the masses, but merely professional agitation that led to the emergence of socialism. So the goal of socialist movement is nothing but overthrowing the brain and money millionaires and enjoying the latter's wealth for themselves. The motives of the class struggle are the greed, envy, and vengefulness of the class intellectuals, who use and abuse the worker as their most convenient sellsword for their own designs and personal ambitions. These intellectuals have refashioned the worker into a martyr of society, whereas the truth is, or at least has been since the trade union and workers' parties became the real rulers of the state, since around 1916, the worker is himself the exploiter of capitalist society. His wages are a purely political affair, and are raised by violence high above his real needs, reducing industry to ruins. It's funny, this is exactly what conservatives think. It's kind of wild. Like, even conservatives today, they still think this. Like, they see, like, I don't know, workers get paid, like, slightly more money or something, and they start talking about how, like, this is socialism, you know? They're the poor, you know, large companies are struggling under the weight of, you know, having to pay an almost livable wage. You know, it's just so bizarre that people are largely also workers. I guess just in other industries think. I guess what is they always think like, oh, it's someone else getting more. You know, and it's like they literally think other people getting more money means they get less money because they have an economically illiterate concept of inflation, where it's caused by people who are poor receiving more money than they should, in quotes. Like, but businesses pay poor people as little as possible, actually. So, I don't know. It's very bizarre. I mean, if people don't just spontaneously demand like to make more money. What happens is they need, like, if gas is $4 a gallon, for example, like it is, you know, right now. If you're lucky, actually, it's higher other places, but if gas $4 a gallon, you can't work $12 an hour. You'll make negative money, you know, if you work for that little. You'll literally lose money working for that little, you know. But they chalk it all up to some sort of secret agenda or something, or you know, the people these days just refusing to work or something like that, even though people are actually more productive than ever. I don't know. I'm sorry. Like, it seems like every conservative viewpoint just has no basis at all in reality, and it blatantly contradicts basic reasoning and, you know, basic understanding of the topics. Anyways, I lost my place. Give me a second. His wages are a purely political affair and are raised by violence high above his real needs, reducing industry to ruins. Thus, the present world crisis was brought about knowing and willingly by labor leadership. Leadership which cannot grasp that there are two kinds of labor. Labor which only a few very human beings of rank are bred for, and the other labors of whose whole value consists in the duration, the quantum. You are born into one as much as the other. Such is fate. This cannot be changed. While the interpretation of this social development comprises nearly the whole book, the revolution of the colored world is summarily dispatched in just a few pages. The assault of the colored races, Asians in particular, on the white race, which is funny, by the way, Asians historically have not been viewed as smart or whatever, like stereotypically. That really only came out in the 90s. It's very interesting when you read like very old racist writings. Kind of like, so Engels is like progressively racist in Origin of the Family, Chapter 1. And this positions that Africans are the smartest race and Asians are the dumbest because their skull sizes. But like their brain size. But brain size is proportional to your size. So like that's the real reason why. But I don't know, it's just funny, like, but anyways. Which the assault of the colored races, Asians in particular, on the white race, which has been sapped of its power by the World War and the tool today to degenerate further into pacifism, is already underway. Salvation, if still possible at all, can only come from a new Caesarism, from the absolute dictatorship of a great individual, reinforced by the strength of a hordes from which the legions of Rome will be reborn. Germany is the soul best suited for this savior dictatorship because here alone, in Prussianism, is there still a race strong and healthy enough for such a dictatorship. I like how that's his argument. It's literally just, I feel like my race is the best, and so that is the race that will prevail. Anyways, on such a diagnostic, no scientific judgment can be passed. To the extent it goes beyond what is obvious, it expresses the personal feelings of the author. It is, in his political confession, the negation of all that Spengler does not consider Prussian to also extends to the values which, at least since Christianity entered the world, have shone a light on humanity. Goodness, justice, and humanity, values which incidentally have been the ideals of more than a few Prussians, appears to Spengler as mere weakness and lies. In a single sweeping condemnation, he refuses the idealism and materialism of modern philosophy because he is quite right to see that both are concerned with the betterment of human existence, to be in freedom and happiness, be it in the blossoming of art, poetry, and thinking. The fate of history falls on the shoulders of more robust powers, and he finds this good. It would be presumptuous to seek the master living history with bookish systems and ideals. To him, all the objectives of the liberal bourgeoisie are bookish. Christian morality, too, insofar as it does not exclusively consist in sheer renunciation. Christian theology is the grandmother of Bolshevism. Human history is the history of war, and so it will always remain. Spengler sings its praises and calls this bold pessimism. With such an attitude of the soul, he can even muster enthusiasm about the present. These are stupendous decades we live in. Stupendous, that is, frightening and devoid of happiness. It is clear he hates happiness, but not, of course, possessions. The will to own possessions and property is only base when found among the working class, but not among those who have already been blessed with both. Rather, for him, this will is the Nordic meaning of life. It dominates the shape of our entire history, from the conquest of semi-mythical kings down to the form of the family in the present, which dies out when the idea of property does. Whoever wants for this instinct, they are not of the race. This pseudo-materialist conception of history may contain an element of truth. It is true that the fate of history does not depend upon intellectual, but upon wholly different, more robust powers. It is true that no future deed can ever undo the blood and misery the basic template of history, past and present, is written in. It is true that despite all the sung and unsung heroes who exist in our shallow time, much as in the other, existence for the greater part of humanity is a senseless struggle with poor results. It is true that the lot of the individuals in today's society is determined, much as in all the chaotic times, by the play of blind forces. But the hymn to meaninglessness, the pleasure taken in the fact that history is yet more natural history than human history, the triumph satisfaction that it never will be better, and that everyone who believes it would were wrong, betray a mockery of any respect for the human being and his possibilities. The all too simple anthropology, that man is evil from birth, as false in its exclusivity as its opposite, corresponds today not to the skepticism of the true connoisseur of history, but only to bitterness. Spengler's work is a necromancy of Machiavelli, but without the latter's belief in the possibility of a happy future. Spengler is a realist. He stands firm on the soil of reality full of horrors. What others held against the age of abhorrent, he makes the guiding principle of the Nordic man he so reveres. Property, not for the sake of plenty and happiness, whoever wills contentment alone does not deserve to exist, but for the sake of acquisition, more possessions and more power, and so forth, for all eternity. This character has been depicted in literature, in Richard Wagner's Alberic, Schatz zu schaffen und Schatz zu bergen, nichts mehr nihilblen, nach doch mit dem Hort in die Halle gehalf, denk ich dann Wunder zu wirken, die ganz Welt gewinn ich mit in mir zu igen. The force incarnated in Alberic is also the meaning of meaningless history, which Spengler affirms. He often speaks of culture, but because this culture has neither the happiness of human beings, or even their betterment as content culture itself becomes a hopeless mechanism, the interlocuting gears. In it, joy is no value. Hagemin son hash de frohin. The text is a consummate and grandiose expression of this barbaric state of mind. Accordingly, the luster of its language drives less from the depth or the clarity of thought than the imposing dimension of its object. Spengler considers preoccupation with the small contemptible and glorifies the sublime, not the moral sublime, which also does not escape his contempt, but the mathematical sublime, the vastness of time, geographical breadth and distance. Later numbers, the quantitatively immeasurable, in short, the concept of what Spengler calls the Faustian, and Hegel, the bad infinite. I love that word. His pathos may therefore be especially moving for those who are thrilled by sheer mass. The mass Spengler speaks of with undisguised disgust when he made up of workers, but which, as the embodiment of years or kilometers, underlies his hierarchy of values. Even among political forces, what makes the greatest impression on him is quantity. Expansiveness is a power, politically and militarily, which has never been overcome, he says with reference to Russia, and repeats with reference to America. The changing content of politics plays a minor role for him. It always comes down to one and the same, sheer power. The superficiality of the book, which pretends to be a scourge of the shallowness of our time, is particularly evident given its fundamental categories. Nietzsche's hymn to man as beast of prey still had, despite everything, a social critical undertone, one which connected him with the impressionistic currents of his contemporaries. It was a protest against the growing inhibition of human powers through the ossifying bourgeois order. Individual tendencies of the enlightened are still alive in him. Spengler's braggadocious idolization of the beast that lives in men and states appears to be nothing more than a projection of the petty bourgeois Philistine's experience of the imperialist politics of the present into eternity. Because the little man sees the Volker are indeed jealous of each other but knows not why, makes the surface into its own ground. He claims the sheer lust for plunder and power are responsible. He confuses essence and appearance. Spengler's enthusiasm for history, at least as it appears in bad textbooks, for the sheer form of strength, for conquest, for punching down, for domination, for the show of brutality within and without, for the elevation of barbaric contempt of law and injustice into principle, and who breaks into tearful lamentation whenever he feels his own cause has been done in injustice. All these features of Spengler's work outline, with great precision, a caricature of the Prussian character, the likes of which only his professed enemies could draw. This author has taken a legend seriously. He has modeled his inmost self upon it. His hatred of the worker, indeed his misanthropy, is given such violent expression, it is as if he wished to escape the accusation of having these qualities by making them his explicit ideals. That's a great way of looking at it. As the consummate documents of a disposition that inclines towards sheer oppression, which, out of secret scruples, hardens and defines and fashions the theory for itself from its lust for domination, the book possesses psychological and historical values. By no means, however, should it be considered representative of the prevailing, and in sociological terms, extremely complex, intellectual currents in present-day Germany. Several of its features belong to the pre-war Junker spirit, whose effectiveness today is severely impaired. Some in German criticism have already declined it. Herr Doppler, your letter in April 18th with the enclosed text has reached me at a time... Excerpt from Horkheimer to J. Doppler. Herr Doppler, your letter of April 18th with the enclosed text has reached me at a time when the work before me is always beyond me. While trying to secure the financial means for the continuation of our studies and a series of rather complicated negotiations, I have been able to finish a number of smaller works of my own, and in collaboration with other members of the institution have completed a manuscript of a larger sociological anthology, the Studien über Autoritet und Familie. Even now, however, I have barely a quarter of an hour left over the most necessary correspondence. Therefore, I hope you'll forgive me for only being able to skim through the draft of your dissertation on Spengler's philosophy of history all too quickly. On the basis of this draft, however, it is hardly possible to see how exactly you mean to approach the matter. I am certain you will avoid a danger which in turns your disposition might remind one of, namely, playing out a sociological doctrine of social position against cultural morphology. Relative to the efforts of the latest Wissenschaftlich to ascribe all cultural achievements in theoretical, artistic, political, or other domains to some so-called social situation, which is moreover very poorly defined, Spengler's undertaking may still be called concrete. His attempt to bring what happens in spiritual domain into connection with the power politics of people and nations is certainly highly inadequate, but the perspective which he opens up in his way, and above all in a series of connections which he uncovers, may at the very least be some limited service within the framework as of a correct theory of history. As you yourself have mentioned in your expose, Spengler has enriched historical research in many respects. Reading The Decline, for all the indignation it arouses, at least expands the horizon of a thinking which has grown accustomed to the average histories. The Wissenschaftlich, this means sociologist, but I don't know, Wissensociology of the present cannot offer you this. But you know this as well as I do, and I am certain you will be careful not to make rush classifications of the ideologies and situations, or make all too sharp divisions between objective and subjective concepts of value in the Weberian sense. Just as you are certain to not apply a static concept of a system in the attempt to define the position of history within the system of sciences, true scientific cognition has a determinate structure in any other one historical instant. But both of the moments which condition this structure, the object of cognition and cognizing subject, are caught up in a continuous transformation. Even if we were to call this theory of the transformation itself history, there can be no doubt that history grasped in such a way is closely connected with certain practical interest. It is entirely conceivable that there comes a historical state of affairs in which the cognition centers not so much on that which transforms as one which is relatively constant. Increased interest in history itself corresponds to the real struggles of the present, and this is no inducement to make history into metaphysics instead of natural sciences, as was previously the case. I will search for the critique you mentioned as soon as I find some time. You can imagine how difficult it is to find such manuscripts in my current situation. I hope it will come to light in the course of some of the cleanup operation I am currently planning, and if so, I will send it to you immediately.